The letter of appointment arrived on a cold Thursday in March, written in a solicitor's hand so precise it might have been carved, rather than penned, informing Miss Alara Voss that the Duke of Ashvale required a botanical cataloguer for the duration of one season. The position offered modest wages, a private room in the East Wing, and meals taken with the household staff. It offered nothing else, no warmth, no welcome. No indication that the man who employed her had spoken a voluntary word to another human being in 3 years. Alara had taken the position because she had no better option, and because she had learned, in the 24 years of her life, that options presented themselves to women like her in narrow corridors with low ceilings, and one did not refuse the corridor simply because it was dim. The estate at Ashvale announced itself through the carriage window as something that had once been magnificent and had decided quietly and without drama to stop trying. The iron gates were sound. The gravel drive was maintained, but the topiary along the entrance had been left to grow past their original shapes, and the climbing roses on the south wall had gone unpruned for so many seasons that they had begun to consume the stone itself, reaching into the mortar with slow vegetable determination. The house was not neglected. It was suspended. There was a difference, Alara thought, between a place that had fallen into disrepair and a place that had simply ceased to move forward. Ashvale had ceased to move forward. Mrs. Holt, the housekeeper, met her at the door with the brisk efficiency of a woman who had long since made peace with the particular sadness of the house she kept. She was small and silver-haired, with eyes that noticed everything, and a mouth that volunteered nothing that had not been directly requested. "His Grace does not take meals with the household," Mrs. Holt said, leading Alara through the entrance hall. "He works in the north study in the mornings and walks the east grounds in the late afternoon. You will not be expected to interact with him beyond the weekly catalogue review, which he conducts on Fridays at 10 o'clock. He is punctual. I recommend you be the same." "And the grounds I am to catalogue?" Alara asked. "The formal gardens, the kitchen garden, the orchard, and the glass houses." Mrs. Holt paused at the foot of the staircase, her hand resting on the newel post. "There is a walled garden on the north side of the estate. You are not to enter it." Alara looked at her. "It is locked," Mrs. Holt added, which was not the same thing as an explanation, and both women knew it. She was shown to her room, which was clean and cold, and had a window that faced east, and she unpacked her things with the methodical calm of someone who had never had enough possessions to make unpacking feel like homecoming. She placed her botanical notebooks on the desk, her pressed specimen collection on the window-sill, and her mother's small watercolor of a garden in summer on the wall above the bed. Then she sat on the edge of the mattress and listened to the house breathe around her. It breathed slowly, like something that had forgotten it was alive. She met the Duke of Ashvale on her 3rd day, and not by design. She had risen early to begin her survey of the glass houses, and she was crossing the north lawn in the gray pre-dawn light when she saw him standing at the far end of the path, quite still, looking at the walled garden's iron gate. He was tall and dark-coated against the pale morning, and he stood with the particular stillness of a man who was not resting but containing, every muscle held in deliberate quiet, like a door braced from the inside. He did not see her, or if he did, he gave no indication. Alara stopped walking. She did not know why. She watched him for a moment, this man who looked like he was standing vigil over something he had already buried, and then she turned and took the long way around to the glass houses, and said nothing about it to anyone. The walled garden's gate was locked, as Mrs. Holt had said. But on her 5th day, passing along the north wall in the course of her survey, Alara noticed that the gate did not fit its frame cleanly. Years of settling had warped the stone arch by a fraction, and the bolt, though thrown, sat imprecisely in its housing. She did not try the gate. She noted the fact and walked on. She tried it on the 7th day. The bolt gave with a sound like a held breath released, and the gate swung inward on hinges that protested with 3 years' worth of rust, and Alara stepped through into what had once been, without question, the most beautiful garden she had ever seen. It was not beautiful now. It was something more complicated than beautiful. The bones of it were extraordinary. She could see that immediately, with the trained eye of someone who had spent her life learning to read what plants were, rather than what they had become. The layout was formal, but not rigid. A series of interlocking beds arranged around a central fountain that had long since gone dry, its basin filled with leaves and 1 winter's worth of standing water, now gone to green. There were roses, dozens of them, perhaps hundreds, climbing and rambling and cascading across iron arches that had rusted to a deep reddish brown, their canes grown wild and crossing and knotted together in the years since any hand had touched them. There were lavender borders gone woody and shapeless. There were peonies pushing through the ground, loyal and perennial, returning each spring to a garden that no longer received them. There was a stone bench near the fountain, and on it, half consumed by moss, was a book left open to a page that weather had long since rendered unreadable. Alara stood in the center of it and felt something move through her that she could not immediately name. It was grief. She recognized it after a moment, with some surprise, because it was not her grief. She had not known this garden when it was alive, had not known whoever had tended it, or walked in it, or left a book open on that bench. But grief, she had found, did not require personal ownership. Sometimes you walked into a space and felt the shape of what had been lost there, the way you felt a cold draft from a room before you understood which window had been left open. Her eyes burned. She pressed her fingers to her mouth. She stood there for a long time, looking at the roses tangled over their rusted arches, at the dry fountain, at the moss-covered bench, and she wept quietly, and without entirely understanding why, because the garden was so clearly made with love and so clearly abandoned, and those 2 facts together were almost more than she could hold. She did not know he was watching. From the window of his north study, 3 floors above the walled garden, the Duke of Ashvale stood with his hand flat against the cold glass and watched the woman he had hired to catalogue his botanical specimens stand in the center of his locked garden and cry. His name was Edmund Vane, and he had not been inside that garden in 3 years, and he had believed, with the certainty of a man who has constructed his grief into something load-bearing that no one else ever would be. He had locked the gate. He had given the key to Mrs. Holt with instructions. He had built the garden 4 years ago for a woman named Catherine, who had been his fiancée, and then his almost wife, and then, in the space of a single winter, a fever's victim, gone before the first roses had ever bloomed. He had finished the garden after her death, because he had not known what else to do with his hands, and then he had locked it and walked away, and not looked at it since, except on mornings when something pulled him to the gate, the way a tongue finds a broken tooth, compulsively, painfully, unable to stop. He watched Miss Voss press her fingers to her mouth. He watched her shoulders move with the effort of contained weeping. He watched her look at the roses with an expression he recognized because he had worn it himself, standing at Catherine's grave in the rain, the look of someone confronting a loss they had no right to claim and feeling it anyway. He did not go down. He stood at the window with his hand on the glass until she finally turned and walked back through the gate, and then he stood there a while longer, looking at the garden she had left behind. Something had shifted. He could feel it and could not name it, and he disliked both facts considerably. He found her in the glass house the following morning, She was crouched over a specimen tray, making notes in a hand so small and precise it might have been printed, and she looked up when he entered with the expression of someone who had been expecting this conversation and had decided to meet it directly rather than wait for it to arrive. "Your Grace," she said, and stood. "You were in the walled garden," he said. She did not flinch. "Yes." The gate was locked. "It was not, strictly speaking, fully locked," she said. "The bolt had shifted in the housing. I should have reported it rather than investigating. I apologize for the trespass." He looked at her. She looked back. Her eyes were clear and steady, and gave him the impression of someone who had learned to be honest because she had found deception too expensive. "What did you think of it?" he asked, and did not know why he asked it. Something moved across her face, a careful rearrangement, a decision made quickly. "I thought it was extraordinary," she said. "The design, the scale. Whoever planned it understood how a garden should feel, as well as how it should look." She paused. "I thought it was very sad." "It is not your concern," he said, but the words came out without the coldness he had intended, and they both heard it. "No," she agreed. "It isn't." She looked down at her specimen tray, then back up at him. "May I ask, the roses on the eastern arch? They're a climbing variety I don't recognize. Old, I think. French, possibly. They would be worth cataloging if you'd permit me to enter properly." He stared at her. "I told you it was not your concern." "You told me it was not my concern," she said. "You didn't tell me not to ask." He left without answering. He was almost to the door of the glass house when she spoke again, quietly, not as a challenge, but as a simple statement of fact. "Someone loved that garden very much," she said. "It seems a pity for it to go entirely to ruin." He did not respond. He walked back to the house and sat in his north study and did not look out the window, and did not think about the garden or the woman who had wept in it, and managed neither successfully. She began restoring it on a Tuesday. He did not give her permission. She did not ask for it again. He came to the window of his study and found her there, with a pair of pruning shears and a barrow, working at the tangled canes of the eastern arch, with the focused patience of someone who understood that the work would take longer than a single morning, and had made peace with that fact before she began. She wore her plainest dress, and had her hair pinned back without ceremony, and she moved through the neglected beds with the careful attention of a physician, assessing before cutting, choosing what to save, leaving the healthy growth, and removing only what had died or crossed or choked the living. He watched for 20 minutes. Then he went back to his desk and could not read a word of what was in front of him. She came every day after that, in the mornings before her cataloging work, and sometimes in the late afternoons, and he watched from the window with the helpless regularity of a man who has told himself he will stop and cannot. She cleared the fountain basin on a Thursday. She staked the peonies on a Friday. She found, somewhere in the far corner of the garden behind the overgrown lavender, a small iron trellis he had put up himself the summer before Catherine died, and she righted it with both hands, and stood back to look at it with an expression he could not read from 3 floors above. He went down on the following Monday. He told himself he was going to tell her to stop. She was at the fountain, pulling the last of the debris from the basin with her bare hands, and she looked up when she heard the gate and said nothing, simply waited, her hands wet and her expression composed. "The trellis in the corner," he said. "It needs a support stake. The ground is soft on that side." She looked at him for a moment. "I noticed," she said. "I wasn't certain where you kept the stakes." "Garden shed, west wall." "Thank you," she said. He did not leave. He stood at the edge of the fountain and looked at the basin she had cleared, at the stone now visible beneath the years of accumulated debris, pale and clean. Someone had carved a small pattern into the rim, a trailing vine, simple and repetitive, running all the way around. "I didn't know that was there," he said, before he could stop himself. Alara looked at the carving. "It's lovely," she said. "Whoever laid this stone had good instincts." The stonemason was local. I told him to do something with the edge and left him to it. He paused. He was not accustomed to the sound of his own voice in this garden. It felt strange, like speaking in a room that had been silent so long it had forgotten how to carry sound. He did better than I expected. She was looking at him now, not with the careful assessment she had offered in the glass house, but with something quieter and more direct. "You built it," she said. It was not a question. "Yes." She looked back at the fountain. "Then you know what it was meant to be," she said. "That will help when we get to the roses. Some of them can be saved, more than you'd think." He noticed she had said "we" and said nothing about it. He came back the next day, and the day after that. It was not, he told himself, because of her. It was because the garden was his, and he had abandoned it, and there was something obscene about watching someone else do the work of reclaiming it while he stood at a window. It was because the trellis in the corner needed the stake he had mentioned, and he had not actually trusted her to find the shed. It was because the roses on the eastern arch were a variety he had sourced himself from a nursery in Lyon, and if they were to be catalogued, he should be the one to provide the provenance. He told himself these things with diminishing conviction. She worked beside him without demanding conversation, which was the thing he found he could not have anticipated and could not defend against. She was comfortable with silence, in the way that people are who have spent a great deal of time alone, not performing ease, simply inhabiting it. When she spoke, it was about the garden, the angle of light in the afternoon, the likely cause of a section of lavender that had died back more severely than the rest, the question of whether the climbing roses would bloom this season if they were cut back now, or whether they would need another year to recover. "They'll bloom," he said, on a Wednesday afternoon, cutting back a cane that had grown across the arch in the wrong direction. "This variety is stubborn. It blooms regardless of what's been done to it." "Resilient," she said. "Stubborn," he repeated. "There's a difference." She glanced at him sideways. "Is there?" "Resilience implies the plant has made a choice," he said. "Stubbornness is simply refusal. The rose doesn't know it's been neglected. It blooms because it can't conceive of not blooming." She was quiet for a moment. "I think," she said carefully, "that might be the most hopeful thing I've heard in some time." He looked at her. She was not looking at him. She was looking at the rose cane in her hand, turning it slowly, and her expression was the expression of someone who had said something true and was deciding whether to be embarrassed by it. He was not going to ask. He had made a policy, years ago, of not asking questions that would require him to receive answers, because answers led to knowledge, and knowledge led to caring, and caring led to the particular devastation of loss that he had spent 3 years constructing walls against. "You said the position was modest wages," he said instead. "Where were you before this?" She looked up. "My father's house," she said, and something in her voice told him the subject was not simple. "He remarried 3 years ago. His wife found my botanical work impractical and my presence inconvenient. When the solicitor's letter came, it seemed like a reasonable solution for everyone." "A reasonable solution," he said. "Is that what you call it?" "I call it what it is," she said. "I am not given to self-pity." "No," he said, looking at her. "I can see that." The evening came on slowly, the light going golden and then amber across the garden, and neither of them moved to leave. She was deadheading the peonies. They had bloomed early, small and determined, exactly as she had predicted. And he was working at the far side of the fountain, clearing the last of the moss from the carved vine on the rim, and the garden held them both in a quiet that felt, for the first time in 3 years, like something other than absence. He told her about Catherine on a Thursday evening, 10 days after he had first come down from the window. He had not planned to. He had not spoken Catherine's name aloud to anyone in over a year, and he had not spoken it in this garden ever, because the garden had been built before the words were necessary, and had been locked after the words became unbearable. But they were sitting on the stone bench. She had cleared the moss from it on the previous Tuesday, and he had found a cushion in the garden shed that had somehow survived, and she had placed it there without comment. And the evening was warm enough to stay in, and she had asked him very simply who the garden had been made for. He told her. He told her about Catherine's laugh, which had been too loud for drawing rooms and perfect for gardens. He told her about the winter she died, how fast it had been, how he had sat at her bedside for 6 days and watched a fever do in less than a week. What a lifetime should have been. He told her about finishing the garden after the funeral, because he had already ordered the roses from Lyon and it had seemed wrong to cancel the order, and how he had planted the last of them in October and locked the gate in November and not gone back. Alara listened without interrupting. She did not offer condolences or reassurances or the particular species of sympathy that was really just discomfort looking for resolution. She simply listened, her hands quiet in her lap, her eyes on his face, and when he finished, she said, she would have loved it. The design. It's a garden made by someone who understood what another person needed. Not a showpiece, a place to be. He looked at the fountain. The water was not running. He hadn't yet had the mechanism looked at. But the basin was clean now, the carved vine visible, and in the evening light it looked like what it had always been meant to look like. I couldn't come back, he said, after she died. I tried once. I stood at the gate for an hour and couldn't make myself open it. I know, she said quietly. I saw you. He looked at her. My 3rd morning, she said. Before I knew what the garden was, you were standing at the gate in the early light and you looked. She stopped. I'm sorry. That was an intrusion. What did I look like? He asked. He did not know why he wanted to know. She considered it honestly, the way she considered everything, like someone keeping a promise to a person who was no longer there to receive it, she said. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of something he had no name for yet, something that had been growing in him since the morning he had watched her weep in the garden for a woman she had never known, something that frightened him precisely because it was warm. He reached out and took her hand. It was not a gesture he had planned. His hand simply moved, the way a plant moves toward light, without consultation with the mind that theoretically governed it. His fingers closed over hers on the bench between them, and she went very still, and he felt her pulse under his thumb, quick and honest, and neither of them spoke. I don't know what to do with this, he said finally. His voice was low and rough, and he did not try to smooth it. Neither do I, she said, and then after a moment, but I think the garden is nearly ready for the roses to bloom. He understood what she meant. He was not certain he deserved it, but he did not let go of her hand. The roses bloomed on the 1st of May. He had been right about the variety, stubborn, unkillable, indifferent to 3 years of neglect. The climbers on the eastern arch came into flower all at once, a cascade of deep pink that was almost red, filling the walled garden with a scent so dense and sweet it reached the upper windows of the house. Alara stood beneath the arch in the morning light and looked up at them and laughed, a sound so unguarded and delighted that it rang off the old stone walls and found its way to every corner of the garden. He heard it from across the garden and felt something move in his chest that he had not felt in 4 years. His mother arrived from Bath on the 2nd of May, which was either excellent timing or the particular brand of maternal instinct that transcended geography. The Dowager Duchess of Asheville was a small woman who had survived 40 years of aristocratic society by being considerably more perceptive than anyone gave her credit for, and she stood in the doorway of the walled garden on the morning of her arrival and looked at her son standing beside a young woman with dirt on her gloves and roses in her hair, and said, with great satisfaction, "Well, the garden is open again?" "Mother," Edmund said. "Don't," she said pleasantly. "I've been waiting 3 years for something to reach you. I'm not going to pretend it hasn't." She turned to Alara with the warm directness of someone who had decided in the first 10 seconds of an encounter how she felt about a person. "You must be Miss Voss. My son writes very little in his letters, but I notice he has mentioned you in the last 4. Alara glanced at Edmund. He was looking at the roses. "He is not as closed as he appears," the Dowager said, more quietly to Alara. "He is simply a man who loved something very much and lost it, and did not know how to begin again. That is not a character flaw. It is a wound, and wounds, in my experience, heal fastest when someone refuses to be frightened of them." Ilara thought of the garden as she had first found it, the dry fountain, the tangled roses, the moss-covered bench with its unreadable book. She thought of what it looked like now, 3 months later, with the fountain cleaned, and the roses blooming, and the lavender cut back to new growth, and the peonies standing in full flower along the south wall. "I wasn't frightened," she said. "I was sad for it. That's different." The Dowager smiled. "Yes," she said, "it is." The confrontation came, as confrontations in families always do, not with warning, but with a letter. It arrived from Edmund's cousin, a man named Gerald Vane, who had spent 3 years watching the dukedom's heir, apparent live involuntary isolation, and had apparently decided that this situation presented an opportunity. The letter was precise and unpleasant. Edmund's continued refusal to engage with society, to attend the season, to consider his obligations to the title and the family, had become a matter of public comment. It was time for him to marry appropriately. Gerald had taken the liberty of arranging an introduction to a young woman of excellent family and considerable fortune. He would be arriving at Asheville in a fortnight to facilitate the meeting. Edmund read the letter twice. Then he set it on his desk and went to the window and looked at the walled garden below, where Alara was tying back a new cane on the eastern arch with a length of green twine, her head bent in concentration. He had been afraid these past weeks of exactly this, not Gerald, not the letter, but the moment when the world outside the garden wall would make its claim on him, and he would have to decide what he was willing to do about it. He had been afraid because the answer, he now understood, was not ambiguous. The answer was simply terrifying. He went down to the garden. She knew something had happened from the way he came through the gate. Not his usual deliberate pace, but something faster, less composed. She turned from the arch and looked at him and waited. "I have something to tell you, Titosen, and I want to say it before I lose the courage for it, because I have spent 3 years becoming very practiced at not saying things, and I find the habit difficult to break." She set down the twine. "All right," she said. "I built this garden for Catherine," he said. "And I loved her, and I lost her, and I have spent every day since then believing that the appropriate response to that loss was to stop. Stop wanting things. Stop building things. Stop letting anything matter enough to be worth the risk of losing it." He stopped. His jaw was tight. "I was wrong." She was very still. "You came into this garden and you wept for a woman you had never known," he said, "and I watched you from that window, and I understood for the first time in 3 years that grief is not the opposite of love. It is what love looks like when it has nowhere to go." He took a step toward her. You gave it somewhere to go. You gave the garden somewhere to go. You gave me. He stopped again. His voice had cracked on the last word, and he did not attempt to smooth it over. Edmund, she said, and his name in her voice was something he had not known he was waiting to hear. I am not offering you a position, he said. I am not asking you to stay out of practicality or obligation, or because the garden needs tending. I am asking you to stay because I have been watching you for 3 months, and I have understood, slowly and with considerable resistance, that you are the first person since Catherine who has made this house feel like it is still alive. He reached out and took her hand, the way he had on the bench that evening, without consultation. And I would like it to stay alive. I would like to stay alive. I think I had forgotten how. Her eyes were bright. She did not look away. Your cousin, she said. The letter. Is none of his concern, Edmund said. I will write to him today. There will be no arranged introduction. There will be no meeting. He paused. Unless you tell me I am wrong to say so, unless you tell me that what I have felt these past months has been entirely one-sided, in which case I will apologize for the intrusion, and we will speak no more of it. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she looked at the roses on the eastern arch, blooming in the morning light, stubborn and unkillable, and indifferent to everything that had tried to stop them. You are not wrong, she said. He brought her hand to his lips. She felt the warmth of it travel all the way to her collarbone. Gerald Vane arrived as promised, and departed considerably faster than he had intended, having encountered in the Duke of Ashvale a man who bore very little resemblance to the isolated, manageable figure he had been expecting. Edmund was calm throughout the interview, and entirely immovable, and when Gerald suggested that Miss Voss was an unsuitable choice for a duchess, a botanical cataloguer, no family of consequence, no fortune, no connections, Edmund looked at his cousin with the particular expression of a man who has recently rediscovered what he values and is not inclined to discuss it with people who do not understand value. She restored a garden I had given up on, Edmund said. She did it without permission, without instruction, and without asking for anything in return. I am not aware that a duchess requires a fortune. I am aware that she requires character. Miss Voss has more of it than anyone I have met. Gerald left. The matter was not raised again. They were married in the garden on a morning in June, when the roses were at their fullest, and the lavender was beginning to bloom, and the fountain, Edmund had finally had the mechanism repaired, and the water ran again, clear and steady over the carved vine on the rim, caught the light and scattered it across the stone paths in small, bright pieces. The ceremony was small. The Dowager Duchess, Mrs. Holt, the household staff, and the local vicar, who had known Edmund since boyhood and seemed genuinely moved by the occasion. Edmund's vows were not the standard words. He had written them himself, in the north study, at 2 a.m, in the same window where he had once watched her weep and felt something shift that he could not name. I built this garden for love, he said, and then I locked it because I was afraid. You opened it. You came in without permission, and you wept for someone you had never known, and you began, without asking, to make it live again. I want to spend the rest of my life being worthy of that instinct. I want to be the kind of man who deserves a woman who weeps for strangers' gardens and saves them anyway. Alara's vows were shorter. I came here with low expectations, she said, and found something I didn't know I was looking for. I intend to keep it. The Dowager Duchess wept without embarrassment. Mrs. Holt did not weep, but looked for a moment, as though she was considering it. 2 years later, on a morning in early May, Alara stood at the window of the north study, her study now as much as his, and watched her daughter toddle across the garden path below with the unsteady determination of a 15-month-old who has recently discovered that legs are useful. Edmund was crouched at the child's level near the fountain, one hand hovering at her back without touching, ready to catch but not to prevent, and the roses on the eastern arch were in full bloom above them, deep pink in the morning light. Alara pressed her hand flat against the glass. She heard Edmund's step on the stair before she saw him. He had left the garden to the child and the nursemaid and come back inside, and he came to stand behind her at the window, his hands settling at her waist, his chin at her shoulder, looking out at what they had made together. "Tell me again," he said. It was a ritual they had developed without deciding to, the retelling of the beginning, the way you return to a place that was difficult to get to, because the difficulty is part of what makes it yours. "I found the gate unlatched," she said, "and I went in, and it was the saddest, most beautiful thing I had ever seen. And then I wept for it," she said, "for someone I had never known, for a garden that had been loved and left." She paused, "And then I decided to fix it." Below them, their daughter sat down abruptly on the garden path and looked at the roses with the frank, uncomplicated interest of someone encountering beauty for the first time. Edmund's hand tightened at Alara's waist. "She has your instincts," he said. "She has your stubbornness," Alara said. "Resilience," he corrected, and she felt him smile against her temple. The fountain ran below them, clear and steady. The roses bloomed. The garden, which had been built for love and locked against grief, and opened again by a woman who had wept for a stranger, went on living in the morning light, stubborn, unkillable, indifferent to everything that had once tried to stop it. "Thank you for staying with Edmund and Alara until the very end." Their story began with a locked gate and a garden full of grief, and became something neither of them had the courage to hope for. Proof that the things we build with love don't stop being worth tending, even when we've forgotten how to tend them. If you believe in stories about people who open locked gates and refuse to leave, subscribe and ring the bell. There are more impossible gardens, more hard-won choices, more loves that bloom in spite of everything. You are the reason these stories exist.